When you look at the stats, there's an interesting trend when we approach our 50s and 60s that nobody seems to be talking about. The good news, for most of us anyway, is that since the early 2000s, divorce rates peaked then and have been on an overall decline year on year. People are simply getting divorced less. But there's one demographic where divorce rates have gone up in opposition to the overall trend, and that's the over 65s. Now, the deeper I digged when I was doing the research into this video, the more astounded I was. Because broadly speaking, the number of divorces for those under 55 have gone down, depending on what study you use, by 15 to 20%. And the share of people over 55 who have got divorced has doubled since the early 2000s. Now, there's even a phrase for it, silver splitting. And it's a trend because of the work that I do with What Happens Next that I'm really curious about and want to explore so we can hopefully provide a bit of insight. So in this video, I want to explore the concept of silver splitting, some of the potential reasons behind this change, and if we're approaching our own what happens next moment, how our relationships can change, and if we really value those relationships, what might we need to do to make sure their continued success. Welcome to What Happens Next. If you only hear about divorce rates going down, it's easy to assume the story ends there. But there's a more complex tale hiding in the data. You see, in England and Wales, and this is where the Office of National Statistics data becomes really useful, overall divorce rose sharply in the decades after reform in the early 70s, climbed towards a peak in the early 2000s, and then for the past 20 years have been declining steadily. However, across that same age period, the age at which people get divorced has drifted upwards. Currently it's 46.9 for men and 44.5 for women, and that has been going up year on year since 1985. And that data implies that divorce increasingly is becoming a midlife or later life event, not simply for younger adults. Now, we need to be careful about some of the data, particularly from 2020 onwards, because the ONS stopped taking information about age of divorced. But there is an interesting trend. Now, there is a couple of things happening here. As we live longer, that will have an impact on the divorce rates because effectively people are remaining in marriages longer than they ever thought they would be. So the divorce rate is guided a bit in older people by demographics. But I reckon the story's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. You see, I don't think we can ignore how the shape of our lives have changed. Previous generations experienced older age as a smaller chapter of their lives. Health was poorer, lifespan shorter, and financial independence, especially for women, less common. Now, many couples look at the horizon and see a healthier later life, potentially decades of life ahead, and find themselves asking an interesting question. Do I want to live the rest of my life with this person like this? Now, I've got to be really careful with this video, and I'm not a counsellor. I'm just giving my perspective on what I see and what we might want to think about. But let's be clear, not all marriages are built to last, and not all humans should be married. I appreciate that we're all complex, nuanced people, and marriage and continued marriage isn't right for us all. This blog isn't designed to make judgments about marriage and whether it's right for you to either get married or continue to be married, but to explore some of the challenges married people face when they get older. Also, it might sound like I'm saying younger people are now better at maintaining longer-term relationships than older people. To be clear, I'm not. Nowadays, people marry later and live together before they marry. Combine this with the fact that as marriage becomes less automatic, younger individuals who do get married do it more intentionally. So that might have an impact on why divorce in younger people is reducing. However, it still doesn't explain the trend of older people getting divorced more. So here's the big question. Why are we getting divorced more in our 50s, 60s and beyond? And I reckon there's a bunch of considerations we need to think about when we're answering this complicated question. Firstly, the nature of our work often changes in this chapter of our lives. Work often provides us with separate daily lives, different social networks. It gives us identity, it gives us status and much more. So when we move away from work, couples often experience a dramatic rise in shared time, and for some couples that's great. For others, it exposes a truth that they might have been avoiding. We don't know how to deal with this without having all of the pressures of day-to-day life. Also, we probably need to talk about the big challenge we face in our 50s, 60s and beyond, and that's identity. For many of us, identity is intertwined with work. At work, you're often needed, you're respected, you're the provider. When these changes, people can often get depressed, become more emotionally raw, and sometimes irritable, anxious, and restless. That can have a negative impact on our long-term relationships, including with our husband or wife. And if both people are going through this identity change at the same time, the relationship can feel like it's lost. If you add to that the fact that it's often the time that kids are growing up and leaving the house, and even though kids can be a pain, and we've all had it from sleepless tantrums when they were young to teenage tantrums, all the way to being quite expensive hobbies, kids. We know that kids in a lot of our lives give us fantastic purpose. I know it has mine. Also, the way we look at our lives has changed. We might approach the latter years of our lives knowing we've got a few more decades of really active life, and potentially a decade or so more than that of lives together. So the relationship question becomes more nuanced. Do I want to share the next few decades with that person? Now, as I've said, I'm no marriage counsellor. I'm just curious about this subject. But in my experience, working with clients, helping them plan for retirement over the past 20 years in my career, there seems to be one thing better than all others which allows us to have better positive relationships. Just better communication. And I'm not saying this from a place of perfection by all means. It's something I need to work on every day too. One of the things I'd suggest is definitely worth doing before you take action and you start thinking about either retirement or the next chapter of your life is to sit down with your partner and plan together. Not just the money, but also how you're going to collectively spend your time. I'd start with questions like, what does a great next 10 years look like for you? What are you hoping retirement gives you? What are you scared retirement might take away? What in retirement and the next chapter of your life would you love to be more of and less of? And where would you like us to be closer in the next chapter of your life? Because my experience is often the questions we ask ourselves about retirement are often about money and travel. And whilst I talk about money every day, and I can talk travel to the cows come home, I absolutely love it, I reckon there are deeper questions to ask about purpose, meaning, identity, and how to spend time with somebody you love when the circumstances so fundamentally change. I also believe it's worth asking some questions about time, like, what do we love to do together? What do we love doing apart? What do we love doing separately? What don't we enjoy doing together? And then, in the next chapter of our lives, what list of activities do we want to grow? What I've also seen work with my clients is a shared project that isn't about bringing up the kids, but you can work on together. That might include travelling with purpose, for example, building a charity organisation. One of our guests did that and spoke about that really eloquently on the What Happens Next. Andrew West spoke about that really eloquently on the channel. I'd recommend you take a look at his video. It could be volunteering together. It could be exercising together. It could be learning together. It could be building or being part of a community. Or it could be doing something really creative together. This isn't about staying busy. It's about finding ways that can keep you better connected. Now, again, really important thing to say, for some older divorcees, it might be absolutely the right thing to do to separate. Later life divorce can be a signal that people are just no longer willing to spend decades in a life that doesn't suit them anymore. That doesn't mean divorce is good. It just means the desire beneath it is understandable and time is short. One of my favourite books is the book The Good Life by Robert Waldinger. I speak about it on this channel quite a lot. In that book, he talks about the fact that the quality of our lives are determined by the quality of our relationships. When we're thinking about what happens next and the next chapter of our lives, it's really important before we take that leap to think about the most important often relationship in our life, the one we love and have built a life with the most, and how we're going to maintain and nurture that relationship. For more stuff from What Happens Next, I want to share with you this amazing interview with Dr. Lucy Ryan, who's got some really interesting perspectives on midlife and how to explore purpose, balance and joy in the next chapter of our lives. And in this one, I chat with the brilliant Gina Gardiner about her life story and lessons she's learned along the way about managing change, particularly when it comes to what happens next. That's it for today. Have a lovely day and we'll see you on the channel soon.